Hello again. I'm here with my dear friend Greg as we do one final reflection about the movement through the Teach Now clinical practice for our final video submission in what unit are we in? 11, I think. And this one has turned out obviously to be the best one, and I think that's the way that it should be. For this assignment, we were supposed to touch on each piece of 8 of the 10 sections of the rubric that apply directly to classroom instruction. And through the guidance of my mentor here and some tactics and other ideas that I gained from the program itself and from cohort members, I feel like this is by far the best lesson, even though it wasn't able to be demonstrated in one coherent, long class period. It's actually broken into 3. 4 in some cases, but it is an example of how I've been able to kind of evolve my instructional strategy. So as you can guide and find through on this, I took the requirements for the IB guide to become very familiar with the carbon and nitrogen cycle because they are key components to the understanding of most things, right? And as we continue to move through this, they're able to layer in different portions of the class in terms of systems diagram construction and analysis. So while we did that, I was able to apply some tools that Greg was kind enough to share with me that he had taken a paper-based, really, I won't use the word rudimentary,
but also kind of like difficult to model
right.
Type station simulation.
Basically speaking, a passport of an adventure through the nitrogen cycle that Greg digitized and made this more about a learning process as opposed to one that was an activity to play with friends. And it was great because I was able to dedicate one class period to an introduction to the carbon cycle because they had already been exposed to it, to dive into some vocabulary development, and then understanding the random nature with which energy and matter moves through systems on Earth, which is another key component of the class. And the implementation of technology and the personalized nature where students are able to make their own connections and those types of things really did go well. I did the same thing for the nitrogen cycle, and as an assessment and summary, I asked students to do some reading independently, and through classroom discussion, we identified how human choice and activities influence these natural cycles, and then I asked students to construct a systems diagram of something that they created and expand upon how human activity influences this. And one of the discoveries that I made by the end of it was that on the mid-year exam they're about to take next week, I effectively reviewed 30 or 35% of it in an assessment, right? That basically speaking, I could just give them an informal quiz grade, if you will, just to participate in something in class that they're about to be assessed on again. And little do they know they're going to do the same thing, a week from the due date. So it worked out very nicely. I feel as though it was well differentiated. I was able to allow student choice and manage, small or major misconceptions as they occurred. I was able to, just throw out question and response style questions. As I told you, Greg, I was able to ask students, is it okay for something to stay somewhere longer than somewhere else, and kind of help them piece together these things as application of knowledge instead of memorization and regurgitation, right? So I think the use of technology was very there, and it helped improve student engagement and understanding. I will also point out that the simulation idea and how you have that set up and were able to help me implement into this was that connecting real life pictures or descriptions, lightning strikes, carbon is fixed from atmosphere to soil for plant absorption. That's great because it helps us, instead of saying fixation is blank, lightning does that. It does the connection for the students, and in real time allows them to piece together those different components as opposed to asking them to memorize things and develop it on their own. I felt it was a more powerful tool.
Yeah.
and your guidance through all this has made me feel good about it, and I feel confident in saying of all the things that I've submitted thus far, this example is the closest to outstanding that I've made it to thus far. From a planning aspect, from a content understanding, knowledge, connections, differentiation, just all of it together, it really went well. And fortunately, you were able to observe one of them, and I was just curious if you had any feedback to add on ways to extend this, because I'll be doing it again in the future. So if you had some feedback on ideas on improvement or validation or things that I might have missed over so far in our reflection.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I really like that simulation for, particularly being it digital, is that it's much more easy to differentiate for students based on readiness and basically on readiness. If they've never experienced the content before, if you have like really low achieving students and really high achieving students, there's so many different ways that you can apply it. For example, with like just basic vocabulary development, with lower achieving students that need to enter into that concept. Whereas in the upper levels, when they're synthesizing this systems diagram from their simulation, you can use it as an experience, especially in environmental and life sciences. It's much more difficult to do experimentation because the time scale that it takes or the scale of what is studied is far too great or far too small. You can use that as an example of this is experimentation and provide them with different ideas of like what exactly do scientists do, because it's not always in a lab. Right. It's not always with chemicals and reactions. Like that's exciting, but it's a different kind of way of showing them what experimentation and investigation is, and can also develop other skills that are more affective or about their attitudes toward learning, or even developing more abstract concepts, like you said about with like how much time do molecules spend in each reservoir or storage area, and that's a great way to explain the nature of science with scale, proportion, and time.
Temporal and spatial as well.
Because that's a really difficult concept to teach if it's just this is what these words mean. But if they have something real to attach to it, it develops those things much more meaningfully. And it also, like with the simulation, it puts a lot more responsibility on the student to develop their own knowledge, and also like make their own personal meaning out of it, because everybody, based on their own prior experiences, prior learning, what they're interested in, that's going to be like very different for each of them, but then they can have those conversations and talk about it and share strategies or share what they learned with each other too.
Well, great. Well, and that hopefully it won't be the last time we collaborate, but at least in this sense, we don't have to videotape it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm pleased with the progression that I've been able to make through this program, and I'm not sad that this is the last time I have to do this. I will be able to take some of the things that I've learned and put it into practice. So thanks again, friend.
You're welcome.
Talk to you soon.